The ship moved through the darkness of space without making a single sound. And inside that ship sat a being made of living crystal who had seen more stars born and die than any human could ever count in 1,000 lifetimes. Ambassador Velthorn of the Ethery race pressed his translucent fingers against the viewing panel and watched the small blue planet grow larger and larger as his vessel approached it slowly and carefully. And he felt nothing but boredom at the start of yet another routine mission that would probably end the same way all the others had ended before. The Galactic Concord had sent him to observe and evaluate over 300 newly spacefaring species during his career. And every single time the result was the same predictable outcome that made him tired of this work. Some species showed promise at first, but then destroyed themselves with their own weapons before they could mature. Others were peaceful, but so incredibly dull that they contributed nothing new to galactic civilization. And still others were simply too aggressive or too primitive to ever join the greater community of intelligent life. Velthorn expected nothing different from these creatures, called humans, who lived on the third planet from their small yellow sun in an unremarkable corner of an unremarkable galaxy. His crystalline body shifted colors from deep blue to pale violet as he activated the ship's scanning systems and began the standard observation protocols that he had performed so many times before. The Concord required detailed reports on biology, technology, social structures, and psychological profiles before any species could even be considered for contact. And most species failed at least one of these basic tests within the first day of observation. But then something strange happened that made Velthorn stop and lean closer to his sensors with confusion spreading across his ancient face. The electromagnetic spectrum around this planet was absolutely screaming with signals, and there were millions upon millions of transmissions happening all at once in complete chaos. Radio waves and television broadcasts and digital communications were bouncing around the atmosphere, like a storm of noise that had no order or pattern to it whatsoever. No species communicated like this because it was madness. Every civilized race in the galaxy used clean and organized channels that never overlapped or interfered with each other. But these humans seemed to be shouting over one another constantly without any care for efficiency or clarity at all. Velthorn ran the numbers through his computer and discovered that there were over 8 billion individual humans alive on this single planet. And nearly all of them had access to communication devices that let them broadcast their thoughts to anyone who would listen. 8 billion voices talking and arguing and laughing and crying all at the same time. The ambassador had never seen anything like it in his entire existence spanning hundreds of thousands of years. He pulled up the Concord's preliminary data on this species and began reading with growing interest that replaced his earlier boredom completely. The humans had only achieved powered flight around 120 of their short years ago, which was barely a moment in cosmic terms. They had only split the atom around 80 years ago and only touched their own moon around 55 years ago. By all standard measurements, they were infants who had barely learned to crawl beyond their own cradle world. And yet the scanner data showed something that should have been impossible for such a young species to achieve. Velthorn zoomed in on different regions of the planet and felt his crystalline form pulse with shock at what he observed. There were humans living in frozen wastelands where temperatures dropped so low that most organic life would die within minutes of exposure. They had built shelters and heating systems and supply chains that kept them alive in conditions that should have killed them easily. There were humans living in vast deserts where water was almost impossible to find, and the heat during the day could cook flesh. And yet they had created cities with millions of inhabitants who somehow thrived in those hostile environments. There were humans living on tiny islands in the middle of enormous oceans. Humans living on mountains so tall that the air was too thin to breathe properly. Humans living in dense jungles filled with creatures that wanted to eat them. and humans living in swamps and plains and valleys and every other type of terrain that existed on their world. No other species spread themselves so thin across so many different environments on their home planet because it was inefficient and dangerous and made no logical sense. Most intelligent races picked the most comfortable region of their world and stayed there until they developed space travel. But humans seemed determined to exist everywhere all at once, as if they were trying to prove something to the universe itself. Velthorin contacted the Concord's Central Archive and requested all available data on human history. And when the files arrived, he began reading with an intensity he had not felt in thousands of years. The humans had originally evolved in one region of their planet, but had then spread across the entire world over tens of thousands of years, walking and sailing and eventually flying to every corner of their globe. They had faced ice ages and volcanic eruptions and plagues and famines and countless other disasters that should have wiped them out completely. But they survived every single time and kept spreading and kept building and kept growing in numbers that defied all reasonable predictions. The ambassador found records of humans who had walked across frozen land bridges to reach new continents. He found records of humans who had sailed across endless oceans in wooden boats with nothing but the stars to guide them. He found records of humans who had climbed the highest mountains on their world simply because those mountains existed and they wanted to stand on top of them. There was no logical reason for any of these actions because the risks far outweighed any possible rewards. And yet humans did these things anyway, over and over again throughout their entire history. Velthorin leaned back in his command chair and realized that his preliminary assessment would need to be much longer and much more detailed than he had originally planned. These creatures were not like the others he had observed before. There was something burning inside them that pushed them forward, even when every sensible calculation said they should stop and turn back. There was a fire in their spirits that refused to accept limitations or boundaries or the word impossible. The ambassador opened a new file and began writing his report with careful attention to every detail. Knowing that the Concord would want to understand these strange beings who had somehow spread across an entire planet through sheer stubborn refusal to give up and die. He did not know yet just how much more there was to discover about humanity, or how deeply their story would affect him and every other species in the galaxy. But he was beginning to suspect that this mission would be very different from all the ones that came before it. And for the first time in centuries, Ambassador Velthorin of the ancient Ethery race felt something he had almost forgotten existed somewhere deep inside his crystalline heart. He felt curiosity. 3 weeks passed as Velthorin orbited the blue planet and studied its inhabitants with growing fascination that bordered on obsession. And during that time, he filled report after report with findings that made no sense according to any known model of biological or social development. The ambassador had requested additional scanning equipment from a nearby Concord outpost because his standard sensors were simply not advanced enough to capture all the strange things these humans were doing every single day on their chaotic world. He started with their basic biology and immediately found things that should have been impossible for any species to survive. Humans did not hibernate. Every other carbon-based intelligent species in the known galaxy entered some form of regenerative stasis for significant portions of their existence. The Valmari slept for 6 months out of every year to allow their massive brains to process information properly. The Krethoks entered deep hibernation cycles that lasted decades between periods of activity. Even the Ethery, like Velthorin himself, entered crystalline meditation states that could last for centuries while their bodies healed and grew stronger. But humans simply kept going every single day of their lives without any significant rest period at all. They slept for only a few hours each night. And during that brief time, they experienced something called dreams, where their minds created entire imaginary worlds filled with images and emotions and stories that made no logical sense. Then they woke up and immediately started moving and working and talking again, as if those few hours of unconsciousness were enough to sustain them. The metabolic strain of remaining active for so long should have destroyed their bodies within a few years. But somehow humans managed to survive for 7 or 8 decades on average, despite never giving their systems a proper chance to recover and rebuild. Velthorin calculated that the average human would spend less than 1/3 of their life sleeping, which meant they experienced more continuous, conscious existence in their brief years than most species experienced in centuries of interrupted wakefulness. And what did they do with all that extra conscious time? They ate things that should have killed them. The ambassador watched in horrified amazement as humans consumed the flesh of other creatures and the reproductive material of plants, and the fermented remains of fruits, and grains that have been left to rot in specific ways. They mixed together chemicals and spices that triggered pain receptors in their mouths and called the experience delicious. They ate foods that were literally on fire and called it exciting. They consumed substances that their own bodies recognized as poison and called it celebration. Velthorin observed one human ritual where people gathered together to consume large amounts of a chemical called alcohol that damaged their liver and impaired their brain function and made them act foolish in front of others. The humans knew exactly what this substance did to their bodies because their own medical science had documented every harmful effect in great detail. And they drank it anyway because it made them feel happy for a few hours. The same pattern appeared everywhere the ambassador looked. Humans knew that certain foods would make them gain weight and develop health problems, but they ate those foods anyway because they tasted good. Humans knew that sitting still for too long would weaken their muscles and hurt their backs, but they sat at desks for hours anyway because their jobs required it. Humans knew that looking at bright screens before sleep would disrupt their already inadequate rest cycles, but they stared at their devices anyway because they wanted to see one more video or read one more message. These creatures were constantly fighting against their own biology in pursuit of experiences that brought them momentary pleasure or satisfaction, and they did not seem to care about the long-term consequences at all. But the strangest thing about humans was not what they consumed or how little they rested. The strangest thing was what they created. Velthorin discovered that humans spent enormous amounts of time and energy producing things that served absolutely no survival purpose whatsoever. They painted images on flat surfaces using colored chemicals. They arranged sounds in specific patterns and called it music. They told stories about events that never happened and characters who never existed. They carved shapes out of stone and metal and wood just to look at them. No other species did this before achieving a certain level of technological advancement and social stability, because it was a waste of precious resources that could be used for more practical purposes. Art and music and literature were luxuries that civilizations developed after they had solved all their basic survival problems. But humans had been creating art since before they even developed written language. The ambassador found evidence of paintings on cave walls that were tens of thousands of years old, made by humans who lived short, brutal lives filled with hunger and danger and constant struggle for survival. Those ancient humans had taken time away from hunting and gathering and protecting their families to draw pictures of animals on rocks using pigments made from crushed minerals. Why would they do such a thing when their lives were so difficult and their time was so precious? Velthorin brought this question to the Concord Observation Committee during his weekly briefing, and the response he received shook him to his core. Elder Kethmari was the oldest living being in the known universe, a creature of pure energy who had existed since before the first stars ignited in the darkness of the young cosmos. The Elder had seen species rise and fall across billions of years and had grown so tired and distant that most members of the Concord had never heard the Ancient One speak at all. But when Velthorn presented his findings about human art, Elder Cathmari leaned forward in the council chamber and spoke for the first time in over 1,000 years. "They create knowing they will die," the elder said, in a voice that resonated across dimensions. "They make things that will outlast them. They build permanence from impermanence." The council chamber fell silent as everyone present tried to understand what the Ancient One meant. Velthorn realized that he had missed something important in all his analysis. Human lives were incredibly short compared to most intelligent species. The average human lived less than a single century, which was barely a moment in cosmic terms. Most Concord species measured their lifespans in thousands or millions of years. And yet humans did not despair about their brief existence. They married partners knowing they would eventually die. They raised children knowing they would have to leave those children behind. They built houses and planted trees and wrote books that were meant to outlast their own bodies by generations. They created art because they wanted to leave something behind that would prove they had existed at all. The ambassador returned to his observation with new understanding and new questions burning in his mind. These humans were not just strange biological specimens to be catalogued and forgotten. They were something entirely new in the history of intelligent life. They were creatures who knew exactly how short and fragile their lives were and chose to spend that precious time creating beauty and meaning instead of simply surviving. The Concord Committee requested a full cultural download of everything humans had ever created. And Velthorn knew that what they would find in that data would change everything the galaxy thought it knew about what intelligent life could become. The Concord archivists worked for months translating and organizing the complete cultural history of humanity. And when they finally finished their work, they gathered in the Great Hall of Records to present their findings to the assembled representatives of 12 million member species. Chief Archivist Yolneth stood at the center of the hall with her forearms trembling slightly as she prepared to speak. And everyone noticed that something was wrong because Yolneth had never shown fear or uncertainty in her entire career spanning thousands of years. "We have completed our analysis of human history," she announced in a voice that cracked with emotion she could not hide. "And I must warn you all that what we have found is deeply disturbing and deeply beautiful at the same time. I do not know how to reconcile the contradictions we have discovered, and I suspect that none of you will know either." She activated the holographic display and showed the gathered representatives images of human warfare that made even the most hardened warriors in the room turn away in horror. Humans had been killing each other since before recorded history began. They had invented weapons specifically designed to cause maximum suffering to other humans. They had organized themselves into groups based on tiny differences in skin, color, or language, or religious belief, and then slaughtered each other over those differences. The archivists showed footage of bombs falling on cities filled with innocent people. They showed images of mass graves and concentration camps and killing fields where humans had murdered millions of their own kind for reasons that made no logical sense. They showed records of genocides and ethnic cleansings and holy wars that had wiped out entire populations. War Master Krelvax of the Virax Empire stood up from his seat with his armored scales bristling in shock. The Virax were considered the most aggressive species in the galaxy and had conquered 40 star systems through brutal military force. But even Krelvax had never seen anything like what humans had done to each other. "This is madness," the War Master growled. "They have weapons capable of destroying their entire planet 100 times over. How have they not already killed themselves?" Chief Archivist Yolneth nodded slowly and changed the display to show something that confused the assembled representatives even more. "That is the question we struggled with throughout our analysis," she said. "Humans have the capacity for terrible cruelty beyond anything we have seen in any other species. They have committed atrocities against their own people that defy all understanding. She paused and let the weight of those words settle over the room. And yet they are still here. They have not destroyed themselves. And the reason why is the most extraordinary thing we discovered. The display shifted again to show a very different side of human nature. There was a human named Desmond Doss who had served in one of their great wars but refused to carry a weapon because his beliefs told him that killing was wrong. During a terrible battle where his fellow soldiers were being shot and blown apart all around him, Desmond Doss ran into the danger over and over again to carry wounded men to safety. He saved 75 lives that day while enemies tried to kill him and while explosions shook the ground beneath his feet. When asked why he risked his own life so many times for others, he simply said that he could not leave them behind. The display showed footage of humans rushing into burning buildings to rescue strangers they had never met before. It showed doctors traveling to distant countries to treat sick people for free. It showed ordinary humans diving into freezing rivers to save drowning children and standing in front of tanks to protest injustice and giving away their own food to hungry neighbors. There was a human named Harriet Tubman who has escaped from slavery but then went back into danger over and over again to lead other enslaved people to freedom. There was a human named Oskar Schindler who spent his entire fortune to save over 1,000 people from being murdered during one of humanity's darkest periods. There was a human named Irina Sendler who smuggled thousands of children out of a place of death and hid them with families who protected them. Chief Archivist Yolaneth's voice grew thick with emotion as she continued, showing example after example of human courage and compassion. "We found millions of these stories," she said. "For every act of cruelty in human history, there are countless acts of kindness. For every war they have fought, there are movements of peace. For every time they have torn each other apart, there are moments when they have come together to heal and rebuild." She showed footage of humans from different countries working together to send supplies to disaster victims on the other side of their planet. She showed humans adopting orphan children from nations they had recently been at war with. She showed humans protecting endangered animals and planting forests and cleaning polluted rivers. The same species that built weapons of total destruction also built hospitals and schools and shelters for the homeless. Yolaneth said, "The same creatures that committed genocide also created organizations dedicated to preventing it from ever happening again." The representatives sat in stunned silence as they tried to process what they were seeing. Ambassador Velthorin stood up and addressed the assembly with new understanding in his crystalline voice. "I have watched these humans for many months now," he said, "and I believe I finally understand what makes them different from every other species we have encountered." He walked to the center of the hall and gestured at the display, showing both the horrors and the wonders of human history. Every other species in the galaxy has a nature that defines them. The Varax are warriors. The Mir are traders. The Etheri are scholars. We are what we are, and we do what our nature compels us to do. He turned to face his fellow representatives with something like awe in his ancient eyes. But humans have no single nature. They contain both the capacity for terrible evil and the capacity for incredible good within the same hearts. They can be monsters, and they can be heroes, sometimes within the same lifetime, sometimes within the same day. The ambassador's voice rose with passion as he delivered his conclusion. And that is why they are still alive. They have looked into the darkness inside themselves, and they have chosen again and again to fight against it. They know what they are capable of, and they struggle every single day to be better than their worst impulses. Chief Archivist Yolaneth transmitted the full cultural analysis to every member world of the Galactic Concord, so that all 12 million species could see for themselves what humanity truly was. And for the first time in 3 million years of galactic civilization, the response channels that normally buzzed with 10 billion simultaneous conversations fell completely and utterly silent. No one knew what to say. No one had ever encountered anything like humanity before, and no one could look away from the impossible story of a species that contained both the capacity for ultimate destruction and the choice to become something better. The silence spread across the galaxy like a wave moving through water, and everywhere it touched, beings of every shape and size and composition stopped what they were doing to sit alone with their thoughts. On the crystal homeworld of the Ethery, philosophers who had debated the meaning of existence for millions of years suddenly found themselves without words. They gathered in their great meditation chambers and simply watched the human data streams in complete stillness, their translucent bodies flickering with colors that had no names in any language. On the Iron Fortress worlds of the Vorax Empire, warriors who had never known fear in their entire lives felt something strange stirring in their hearts. War Master Krulvax sat in his command throne and watched footage of human soldiers carrying wounded enemies to safety. And he did not understand why this sight made his eyes burn with moisture he had never experienced before. On the trading stations of the Syndicate of Mir, economists who had calculated the value of every species in purely numerical terms found their equations suddenly meaningless. How could you assign a number to creatures who would sacrifice themselves for strangers? How could you measure the worth of a species that chose love over profit and kindness over efficiency? The Concord communication networks that normally carried 10 billion diplomatic conversations at any given moment went completely quiet. Embassy halls that had buzzed with activity for millions of years stood empty. Council sessions were postponed indefinitely because no one could focus on normal business anymore. Everyone in the galaxy was watching humanity. They watched a human named Viktor Frankl, who had survived one of the worst death camps in human history, and then spent the rest of his life teaching others how to find meaning in suffering. They watched him speak about the importance of choosing your own attitude, even when everything else has been taken away from you. They watched a human named Malala Yousafzai, who had been shot in the head by extremists for daring to seek education, and who then recovered and continued fighting for the rights of children everywhere with even more determination than before. They watched humans building homes for strangers after natural disasters. They watched humans donating blood and organs to save people they would never meet. They watched humans sitting with dying strangers in hospitals so that no one would have to face death alone. The Valmari collective mind, which usually processed information with cold logical precision, experienced something that could only be described as emotional overload. The entire species went into emergency hibernation for 3 days, while they tried to integrate what they had learned about humanity. The ancient Krithox elders, who had seen civilizations rise and fall across billions of years, declared a period of contemplation that would last for one full cycle of their planet around its sun. They said that humanity required more thought than any species they had ever encountered. But the most profound reaction came from Elder Kethmari, the oldest living being in the known universe. The Elder had existed since before the first stars ignited in the darkness of creation. Kethmari had watched galaxies form and collapse. The Ancient One had seen species evolve from single cells into vast civilizations and then fade into extinction. Nothing in the cosmos was new to Elder Kethmari anymore, and the weight of endless existence had made the Ancient One tired and distant, and almost completely disconnected from the concerns of younger beings. But when Kethmari watched the human data streams, something extraordinary happened. The Elder began to weep. Tears of pure energy flowed from Kethmari's ancient form for the first time in over 500,000 years. The representatives who witnessed this sight could not believe what they were seeing because Elder Kethmari had been considered beyond emotion for longer than most species had existed. "Why do you weep, Ancient One?" Ambassador Velthorn asked with reverence and concern. Kethmari took a long moment to compose a response, and when the Elder finally spoke, The words carried a weight that made everyone present feel like they were hearing the voice of the universe itself. "I have seen everything," Kathmari said slowly. "I have watched the birth of stars and the death of worlds. I have seen empires that spanned entire galaxies and civilizations that achieved what lesser minds would call godhood. I have grown so tired of existence that I have forgotten what it felt like to be moved by anything." The elder's energy form pulsed with colors that shifted between sorrow and joy and wonder. "But these humans," Kathmari continued, "these brief flickering flames who live for less than a single beat of a cosmic heart, they have shown me something I have never seen in all my endless years." Every being in the chamber leaned forward to hear what the Ancient One would say. "I have seen powerful species," Kathmari said. "I have seen wise species and ancient species, and species that could reshape reality itself with their thoughts. But I have never seen a species that fights so hard against its own darkness. I have never seen creatures who know exactly how cruel they can be and choose every single day to be kind instead." The elder's tears continued flowing as the ancient voice grew stronger. "They are not defined by their cruelty. They are defined by their refusal to be defined by it. They fall into darkness again and again, and every time they claw their way back toward the light. They fail and they fail and they fail, and they never stop trying to be better." Kathmari rose to full height, and for the first time in millions of years, the Ancient One addressed the Galactic Concord with passion and conviction. "We have conquered the physical universe. We have unlocked the secrets of matter and energy and time itself. But these humans have achieved something that none of us have ever managed." The elder's voice rang through the chamber like a bell tolling across eternity. "They have conquered the darkness within themselves, not by eliminating it because it can never be eliminated, but by choosing to be more than their worst impulses. By deciding every single day that they will try to be good even though being evil would be so much easier." Kathmari turned to face the assembled representatives with eyes that burned with ancient fire. "That is why the galaxy has fallen silent, because we have finally found something truly worthy of our attention. We have found a species that has achieved what all our technology and wisdom could never give us." The elders spread arms of pure light wide enough to embrace the entire universe. "We have found hope." And across the galaxy, from the crystal spires of the ethery homeworld to the iron fortresses of the Varax Empire to the trading stations of the Syndicate of Mir, beings of every kind felt that hope kindle in their own hearts as they watched humanity and wondered what it would be like to meet these impossible creatures face to face. The Galactic Concord debated for many cycles about how to approach humanity, and in the end they made a decision that had never been made before in the entire history of their civilization. They chose Ambassador Velthorin to make first contact, not because he was the most experienced diplomat or the most skilled communicator, but because he had been the one to discover what made humans special in the first place. "You have watched them longer than anyone else," Elder Kathmari said during the final council session. "You understand them better than the rest of us. Go to them and speak for the galaxy, and choose your words carefully, because this moment will be remembered for as long as intelligent life exists." Velthorin accepted the mission with a mixture of honor and terror that he had never felt before. He had evaluated hundreds of species during his career, but he had never actually made direct contact with any of them. That responsibility had always fallen to specialists who trained their entire lives for such moments. But the council was right that he knew humanity better than anyone. And so he prepared his ship for descent and tried to imagine what he would say to the strange and wonderful creatures who had changed everything the galaxy thought it knew about intelligent life. He chose to land near one of the largest human cities, a place called New York that seemed to represent everything chaotic and beautiful and overwhelming about this species. He broadcast a simple message of peace in every human language his translation systems could identify. and then he waited to see how they would respond. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours, millions of humans had gathered in the area around his landing site. They came from every direction, using every form of transportation their civilization had developed. They came in vehicles that rolled on wheels, and vehicles that flew through the air, and vehicles that moved on rails beneath the ground. Some of them simply walked for miles to reach the site because they did not want to miss this moment. Valthorn watched from inside his ship as the crowd grew larger and larger, and he felt his crystalline heart racing with anticipation and fear. What would these unpredictable creatures do when they saw an alien being for the first time? Would they attack? Would they run? Would they try to capture him for study? But when he finally opened the hatch and stepped out into the bright sunlight of Earth, he saw something that made him stop in absolute wonder. The humans were not carrying weapons. They were carrying signs with messages of welcome written in dozens of languages. They were holding flowers and gifts and food they wanted to share. They were playing music and singing songs and waving banners covered with symbols of peace. Children sat on their parents' shoulders and pointed at him with excitement instead of fear. Old people who could barely walk had made the journey just to witness this moment. Young people were crying with joy and hugging each other and laughing with pure delight. Valthorn had expected many possible reactions, but he had not expected this. He had not expected them to be so happy to see him. A platform had been set up near his ship with microphones and speakers that would carry his voice to the massive crowd and broadcast his words across the entire planet. Human leaders had gathered there to officially receive him, but they stepped aside when he approached because they understood that this moment belonged to everyone. The ambassador walked to the center of the platform and looked out at the sea of human faces stretching in every direction as far as his enhanced vision could perceive. There were millions of them watching him in person, and billions more watching through their communication devices, and every single one of them was waiting to hear what he would say. Valthorn took a deep breath, even though his crystalline body did not actually require oxygen. And then he began to speak the words that would be remembered across 1,000 worlds for as long as civilization endured. "People of Earth," he said, and his voice was translated simultaneously into every human language. "We have watched you. We have studied your history and your culture and your achievements and your failures. We have seen everything you have ever done, both the terrible things and the beautiful things." The crowd fell silent as billions of humans held their breath. "We have seen your wars," Valthorn continued. "We have seen the cruelty you have inflicted on each other and the atrocities you have committed against your own kind. We have seen your capacity for destruction and hatred and violence." Some of the humans in the crowd lowered their eyes in shame, but the ambassador's next words made them look up again. "And we have seen your kindness. We have seen you rush into danger to save strangers. We have seen you share your food with the hungry and shelter the homeless and comfort the dying. We have seen you fight against injustice and stand up for those who cannot stand for themselves. We have seen you choose love over hate again and again, even when hate would have been easier." Valthorn's crystalline form began to glow with every color humans could perceive, and several they could not. "The galaxy has known many mighty species. We have encountered conquerors who ruled entire star systems and builders, who constructed wonders beyond imagination, and scholars who unlocked the deepest secrets of the universe. But in all our millions of years of exploration, we have never encountered anything like you." He paused to let those words sink in. "You are not the strongest species we have met. You are not the oldest or the wisest or the most technologically advanced. Your lives are brief, your bodies are fragile, and your knowledge is limited compared to the ancient races of the galaxy." The crowd waited anxiously to hear what would come next. "But you are, without any doubt, the bravest species we have ever encountered. A murmur of surprise rippled through the massive gathering. "You know exactly what you are capable of," Velthorin declared. "You understand the darkness that lives inside your hearts. You have seen your own capacity for evil with clear eyes, and you have looked at that darkness and said no. Every single day, you choose to be better than your worst impulses. Every single day, you fight a battle against your own nature that most species never even attempt." The ambassador extended a limb of living light toward the nearest human, a young woman with tears streaming down her face and hope shining in her eyes. "The Galactic Concord does not offer membership lightly. We have rejected species 1,000 times more powerful than yours because they lacked something essential. We have turned away civilizations that could reshape reality itself because they had not earned the right to join us." Velthorin's voice rose to fill the entire sky. "But today, on behalf of 12 million worlds and trillions of beings across the known universe, I come before you not to invite you to join us." The crowd stirred in confusion. "I come to ask if we may join you." A gasp went through the assembled millions as humans everywhere tried to understand what they had just heard. "You have shown us what courage truly means. You have demonstrated that the measure of a species is not how much power they possess, but how they choose to use it. You have proven that darkness can be overcome not by eliminating it, but by choosing light despite its presence." The ambassador bowed his crystalline head in a gesture of respect that transcended all cultural boundaries. "Humanity of Earth, the galaxy asks for your guidance. Will you teach us how to be brave? Will you show us how to fight against our own worst natures? Will you help us learn what you seem to know in your very bones? That every day is a choice and that we can always choose to be better than we were yesterday?" For a long moment, silence hung over the entire planet. Then the young woman with tears on her face reached out and took Velthorin's extended limb of light in her small human hand. "Yes," she said in a voice barely above a whisper. "We will." And across the galaxy, from crystal spires to iron fortresses to trading stations beyond number, a sound erupted that had never been heard before in the history of intelligent life. 12 million species raised their voices, together in thunderous applause that echoed across dimensions and through the fabric of space itself. Humanity had arrived, and the universe would never be the same.